So today I'm going to talk to you about the history of birds in New York City. And this is a shot taken at Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge by Don Reapy, who is the guardian of Jamaica Bay, looking toward Manhattan Island. And you see the iconic Empire State Building. But what you see in the foreground are all these shorebirds, cormorants, and this looks like a herring gull, and lots of common terns flying overhead. It's kind of a broken down jetty, and I just know it looks like a beer bottle washed up there. But Jamaica Bay is a place to go to see more bird species than even in Central Park in the Ramble, because of all the shorebirds that you'll see there. But I'm going to talk about that later on. And of course, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and Catherine will read them, but also I don't think there's that many of us. So if you want to just unmute yourself and ask me a question while I'm on that slide, that's fine with me. So for most people, this is what New York City looks like: wall to wall, skyscrapers, glass and steel and concrete and cement, everything built up, nary a tree in sight. But for almost 40 years, this was New York for me. This was my home at the 79th Street Boat Basin. I moved there in 1975 as a 30-year-old single woman. And I didn't know very much about the natural world. I just knew I had to be in it. I had to be near water, looking at water. I had to be near trees, looking at them, and flowers and birds and everything else, because that's where I'm the happiest. But it was there that I really became a naturalist. And I'll tell you how that happened. First, we're looking at, this is an aerial view of the marina. So this is the West Side Highway, Riverside Park, 79th Street. This is the traffic circle where you get off the West Side Highway. Wait, this is the West Side Highway up here. This is the promenade along the river. This is the ball fields there. And this is the little marina, built in 1934. Here are our icebreakers. This is A dock, which is a fixed dock, meaning it's built into the riverbed. And little B dock, and then C dock is also fixed into the riverbed, so it doesn't float. A dock and C dock were the original docks of the boat basin. So B, D, and E docks float, and they're the newer docks. For the whole time we lived there, I lived on D dock. This picture, I think, was taken in 2009. And so this would have been our boat then. We moved off in 2011. So this fourth boat from the end. Anyway, I'm showing you this picture to tell you what happened, because every morning and afternoon, it was my job to walk our two dogs. And we always had dogs, you know, they last, but they live 12, 14, 15 years. And my husband would come home. He taught at Brooklyn College for many years, and he would do the nighttime walk, but it was my job to do the daytime walk. And every day I had a pocket full of seed, birdseed, given to me by my neighbor Werner, who lived in this boat. He had an 80-year-old parrot named Bobo. And Bobo was very picky about what he would eat. And so every day Werner would give me all this uneaten seed and say, throw it to the birds. And one day I was throwing it to the birds, and this beautiful little bird showed up. I didn't know what it was. I already showed you a picture of it. Might as well do it again. So it's about 9 inches with a tawny brown body and a red crest and bright red beak, and most beautiful little thing I'd ever seen. And all these other birds came for food every day. And I didn't know the names of birds. I mean, I knew sparrow and robin and pigeon, and that was about it. And so I borrowed a field guide to birds from a friend, and I identified her as a northern female cardinal. And she followed me every day. After a while, I mean, this went on for months. She would sit on the railing at the marina. Go back. What's going on? Boop, boop, boop. So all along the river is a railing. And she would sit right here and call to me at sunup, zip, 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 which is the call of the cardinal. And I would go out and feed her. She followed me for 3 years. Another dramatic story is it was a blizzard and I was teaching at the 92nd Street Y Nursery School, and the Y closed and we all went home. And I walked around the traffic circle to get home, and she came out of the snow to greet me, calling and calling, because I went home and got seed, went out to the park, cleared away snow, put down the seed, and all these birds came down. By then I could identify them. But after 3 years, this handsome red guy showed up, and she hung around with him for a few days and then took off. They took off and I never saw her again. But she had completely changed my life. She was my muse. I went back to school. I got my degree. I became, sorry, I don't know if it's because my cat is sitting on my lap. I became a science teacher. I went and got my master's in education, then I got my doctorate in science education. I started writing. I became a naturalist. So I became a teacher, a naturalist, an author, all because of her. And it totally has enriched my life, learning about the natural world in my beloved city. So why is there such great biodiversity, diversity of bird life here? I mean, when you think of that picture of New York City, you know, of wall-to-wall buildings, and even if you go out into the outer boroughs, you know, it's wall-to-wall houses, apartment houses. But why do we still have so many birds coming here? And that is because of geography. It's our location. Here are the 5 boroughs: Staten Island, Manhattan, Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens. And we sit beneath the Great Atlantic Flyway, which is the route that birds take from their southern feeding grounds, where they go every fall to find food. And then they feed and rest all fall, all winter, and in spring, they come back the same way that they left, over New York City. And they look down and they see there's a lot of habitat for them. For the shorebirds, we have over 500 miles of coastline. For the perching birds, we have 30,000 acres of parkland with millions of trees. We have over 8,000 miles of streets and something like 900,000 street trees. We have freshwater ponds and saltwater ponds. And so many of these birds come down to rest, to feed, and then they come north. They come to you in Connecticut, and they go further north. They go to Connecticut. They go to New England, even further than you. But many of them stay here for the summer. And during the spring, they find their mates, they build their nest, and they raise their young here. So that's why, because we still have so many different habitats here. Thanks, I'm really sorry. Thanks to the vision of the people who planned our city, who made sure we still had parks, and to the people who are in the Parks Department, who are creating these forever wild sites so that animals still have a place here. And to those people fighting to reintroduce native species of plants, because the birds need those plants. They need the insects that eat those plants. So that is why we have so many birds. I'm just going to show you a short video about birding in Manhattan today. See the owl?
Well, you can bird watch anywhere. It's going out and listening and observing and watching the behavior of birds, simply. And, you know, you can do it anywhere. You can do it. I do it right from my window here. You can go into the woods to do it, or you can travel and do it. Birds are everywhere. Bird watching implies that you're using your eyes. Birding implies that you're using both your ears and your eyes. On a checklist, you can say, I checked that bird off because you heard it and you know it's called without ever seeing it. They're here in the middle of the city and they're surviving. Normally there's walks, Lenape Society, New York City Audubon, Museum of Natural History, all kinds of clubs giving walks all the time. And you really see a lot more birds that way. And you meet a lot of nice people. So I started this birding club it was 2007. I started this because I was walking through the park here and we go birding. There was nobody there. Nobody was birding. Maybe one person, two people. And I said, wow, people have to know about this because Central Park was packed with birds. So I started a website called City Island Birds, and I offer free bird walks. And now we have about 300 people on the list, and hundreds of people have gone on the walks. And it's great to see them in the city. I mean, just, you know, otherwise you look out and all you see is concrete and buildings, and you see a bird and it kind of gives you hope. We live in this industrialized place, and birds are part of nature, and it's great to see nature. And I think we all need it. I think people realize it more and more during COVID, where a lot of people became birders when they went for walks to Central Park and saw birds, and they never really looked before because they were too busy with other aspects of their life. My friend and I said, well, we're not doing any more walks. It's too dangerous. We realized it because we realized when you see a bird and you're looking up at the tree and you're looking at the bird and you have the angle, everybody rushes over, you know, and everybody bunches up in one spot to get that angle on the bird. Not good. Also, we were sharing scopes, you know, people would say, hey, try my binoculars, you know, not a good idea. So now we're just more, everybody wears masks, everybody is spread apart. The limit is 10 on the New York City Audubon walk. So there's one on Van Cortlandt Park on Saturday. I said I would do one a month and also limit exposure. If I get COVID, I'm in trouble. I mean, birds are, they're really interesting creatures.
Stop it here. Sorry, you actually are hearing my bird buddy yelling, and I hope it's not bothering you. I don't want to get up and stop him. Now, I want to go back in time. 1609, before the Europeans came, Manhattan Island was the home of the Lenape Indians. And in fact, Mannahatta is the Lenape word for island of many hills. And here's a list of what existed back then, just on Manhattan. So it would have been everywhere in the city, but it's not a city. 1,200 species of vertebrate animals, 600 species of course, native plants, because there were no introduced plants from other countries. 55 habitats. So habitats now, freshwater pond, saltwater pond, forest, beach, things like that. 55 different habitats, 500 hills, 88 miles of streams, 21 ponds, 300 springs, and 17 different soil types. And so if you look at the book Mannahatta, which I urge you to get, it is just so fascinating. Eric Sanderson is the head of this project, and he was able to figure out by looking at old maps from the 17th and 18th centuries, the habitats that were there. And here you can see a lot of the hills all over the place, probably Sugar Hill. And you can see salt marshes. This is what's Harlem now, and the Harlem River. And saltwater streams coming in. The west side was all beaches. This was Jeffrey's Hook. This is where the George Washington Bridge is right now. Here are the Palisades. There's a freshwater pond that the Europeans called Collect Pond, from a Dutch word, kalk. And it was fed by underground springs. And it was 60 feet deep. Of course, it was filled in with all kinds of junk and then paved over. And today, all our courthouses are down there. And this is a quote from the book. In 1609, this island supported more ecological diversity per acre than Yellowstone National Park today. If Mannahatta existed today as it did then, it would be a national park. It would be the crowning glory of American national parks. Eric Sanderson. So back then, birds were a source of food and clothing. And one of the most important birds was the wild turkey. So this is a painting by a friend of mine, but they are really the most gorgeous birds. And in the sunlight, their feathers are so iridescent. But the Lenape used them, they ate them, of course, turkeys are delicious, but they used their feathers to make clothing. And so they would have a raincoat made of turkey feathers because bird feathers have oil in them. They're waterproof by the birds. Birds have an oil gland that they use, and they preen all their feathers and cover them with oil to make them waterproof. The very first book, plate in John James Audubon's Birds of America was the wild turkey. And he writes, the great size and beauty of the wild turkey, its value as a delicate and highly prized article of food, render it one of the most interesting of the birds indigenous to the United States of America. So it had pride of place in his book, Birds of America. Now, John James Audubon, many of you know, I'm sure, came to the United States, tried his hand at business, failed. He was a very talented artist, and he loved birds from the time he was a child. And he went all around the United States, painting every bird he saw. He painted all the birds of North America. And toward the end of his life, when he was in his mid-60s, he moved to New York City. He had an office downtown, and he had a lot of wealthy patrons in New York, which is why he moved here. And he bought 14 acres of land in what is now Washington Heights, Lower Washington Heights, at 155th Street. And in fact, that area today is called Audubon Terrace. And he and his two sons built a house, and they named the area Minnie's Land. Minnie, they had lived in Holland for a while, and Minnie meant mother. And so Minnie's Land it was. He continued to work, but he gradually suffered from dementia, and his sons took over painting and continued building. They were also very talented people. This is a painting by his son Victor of people going out and fishing for American shad, the fish that migrates up the Hudson in the spring, just like the birds do. And apparently this is John James Audubon sitting on a rock. This beach was in front of his house. He painted birds in this book that are now extinct, like the passenger pigeon. There were billions of them. Now there are none. In 1813, Audubon wrote, our parakeet, so this is the Carolina parakeet, a kind of parrot, the only indigenous parrot to North America. Our parakeets are rapidly diminishing. Where 25 years ago they were plentiful, scarcely any now are to be seen. So he was one of the first to ring an alarm that our birds are disappearing. He painted this bird in 1808. 60 years later, birds were being killed by the millions for feathers to go into women's hats. And one of the first birds to be almost wiped out was the Great Egret. And here's a photo taken by a friend of mine, Gloria Nelson. And you can see the beautiful breeding plumage on these birds. And this is what they were killed for, to make these hats. And sometimes they would put the entire dead bird on the hat. So these are two dead Carolina parakeets put on the hat. There was a huge uproar by many people because our birds were being destroyed. Millions of them were being shot and killed for their feathers every year. There was a family, the Grinnell family, that rented a house from Audubon's son, John, in Minnie's Land, which was by the 1850s, after Audubon died in 1851, was now called Audubon Park. This was the house that the Grinnell family rented. And there was a son in the family named George Bird Grinnell. He was 7 years old when he moved there. Next door was Lucy Audubon, Audubon's wife, and she was an amazing teacher. And they hired her to teach their son. She had a classroom in her house, and she taught them reading, writing, arithmetic, and natural history. And George Bird Grinnell was fascinated by birds, and he fell in love with Lucy Audubon. He fell in love with the birds and the animals there. And he went to Yale, and he became very interested in conservation. He moved back to that house as a young man, and he founded the Audubon Society of New York City in 1886 with the express purpose of studying birds and protecting birds. The Audubon magazine is still being published today. Other famous people came out to protect birds. Lily Lehman, at the time, was a famous opera singer, and she couldn't stand that all these birds were being killed for ladies' hats. So she wrote a letter to her fans. I beg all women and girls not to wear birds or birds' feathers on their hats anymore. Every year, 25 millions of useful birds are slaughtered by this terrible folly. The farmers are already suffering from it because they have no birds to pollinate and to eat insects that were killing their plant. And women enjoy wearing feathers like savages. Flowers and ribbons are 1,000 times more beautiful and more becoming. It is the duty of every woman and man to battle against this gruesome folly. For years, my hats have had no feathers. And the Audubon Society came out with their idea of a fashionable hat, the Audubon hat without feathers. In 1904, the Audubon Society met with the Millinery Merchants Association, and they hammered out a deal that milliners would no longer use feathers in women's hats. They would abstain from the importation, manufacture, purchase, or sale of gulls, terns, grebes, hummingbirds, and songbirds. And they would stop the sale of the plumage of egrets and herons and American pelicans, and stop killing birds altogether for the millinery trade. This was a huge agreement. And then in 1918, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was passed, one of the first federal laws to protect the environment. And so it is illegal to shoot a migratory bird, to take their eggs, to take their feathers, to hurt them or their babies in any way. Frank Chapman was the next New Yorker to step up and work toward protecting birds. And he was the curator of birds at the Museum of Natural History. And he came up with the idea of having a Christmas Day side hunt in which teams competed to see how many bird species they could identify. Until then, on Christmas Day, groups of people go out and see how many birds they could kill. So Chapman came up with this wonderful idea about the Christmas bird count. It is still going on today, 120. Last December, it was its 120th anniversary. It's the longest running citizen science survey in the world. The Audubon magazine's name was changed to Bird Lore, and Frank Chapman took over from George Bird Grinnell. And here's what the Audubon magazine looks like today. This was the spring issue. Another very prominent person to take up the cause of protecting birds was Teddy Roosevelt. And he grew up out on Long Island. Like, they had a house in the city too, but this was his drawing of a house sparrow at age 10. And when at the annual meeting of the New York State Audubon Society at the Museum of Natural History, to which he and his father helped found the Museum of Natural History, right? So he wrote a letter in 1899 to the Audubon Society saying, I would like to see all harmless wild things, but especially all birds, protected in every way. I don't understand how any man or woman who really loves nature can fail to try to exert all influence in support of such objects as those of the Audubon Society. And here at that time, he was the governor of the state. And of course, he went on to become president and to protect the environment and start the national parks movement. Oops.
The Christmas bird count was started in 1900 as an alternative activity to overhunting. There was an activity called the side hunt that was done during the holiday period, which really epitomized the overharvest of wildlife. In the latter half of the 1800s, many populations of birds were in decline, especially colonial nesting seabirds and egrets and herons. Feathers and plumes were very much in vogue, both on women's hats and also in other accoutrements of fashion. Not only were individual feathers and plumes used, but oftentimes even whole birds were seen on hats. Literally entire breeding colonies were being extirpated in a given season by the feather hunters. The growing conservation awareness at the end of the 1800s and early 1900s grabbed onto the egrets as the poster child of these birds in decline, and the egret became the symbol of the fledgling Audubon societies at the time. Frank Chapman, who was an ornithologist at the American Museum of Natural History, was among many people who were realizing that conservation was necessary, and he proposed the idea of doing a Christmas bird census rather than a holiday bird hunt. That first year, there were counts done in 25 locations by 27 people across the continent, actually, and it's been done every year since 1900. My name is Jeff Lebaron. I'm director of the Christmas bird count for National Audubon Society. I've always loved birds. Birds actually gave me the ability to realize that you can engage other people in the environment because they're so captivating. They're beautiful, they're fascinating, they do amazing things, and there are lots of different kinds of them. And with a little bit of effort, you can actually have a very up close and personal encounter with birds. Literally every human being on the face of the earth on any given day can go out and see a bird. And I don't think there's any other kind of animal or wildlife that you can say that about. In the present day, the Christmas bird count has grown tremendously. We now have over 60,000 observers out in over 2,200 locations across the hemisphere. One of the important things that the Christmas bird count data set enables us as scientists to do is to answer the popular question that we get all the time: how are the birds doing? It's a complicated question, really, because some birds are actually doing very well, while many groups are actually doing very poorly. Another really important thing that we've learned from the Christmas bird count data set is how are birds responding to changing winter conditions, early winter conditions. We've learned in the Birds and Climate Change report that a number of species have actually significantly changed the center of their abundance as seen during the Christmas bird count. And over 60 of them actually have shifted their range more than 100 miles northward in the last 50 years.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. These wading birds and shorebirds and birds of the coastline not only had to face being killed for their feathers, but as New York City grew and waste was poured into our waterways, and during the 19th and 20th centuries, and until they created Congress created the Clean Water Act in 1972, all our native fish left. It was just too polluted. And because the fish left, the birds left. So we didn't have any more of these colonial nesters, great egrets, the herons, the cormorants, so many of these wonderful colonial nesting birds. And the Clean Water Act started to change that. I mean, in the Hudson River alone, the entire west side from the village all the way up to Inwood, the raw sewage from every toilet would pour into the Hudson River. And then the river started to clean up really quickly. The fish came back and the birds came back. And the birds started to colonize the tiny islands throughout the New York City area. And the New York City Audubon Chapter was founded in 1979. And one of their first acts was the Harbor Herons Project to protect these shorebirds, these colonial nesters on the small island. Here you see Ed Koch, where they're signing this protection. And so these are the birds of the salt marshes. So here is Jamaica Bay and its islands. And I went to visit it. Here are all there's so many little islands. Utah Island across from the United Nations, Rikers Island, and then up off City Island is Goose Island, Huckleberry Island, and then all these islands in Jamaica Bay. And I went with the Audubon Society and Don Reapy to one of these islands when I was writing my book about the neighborhood birds. So here you have the great egret and the snowy egret. So wading birds have the very long toes, which helps balance their weight so they don't sink into the muck. So this is the boat we took from Don Reapy's home in Broad Channel to this island. I'm just going to play a second of this, which is very noisy. These are all colonial nesting birds. Let me see if I can do this. No. It takes me a minute to get past this, so maybe I need to go all the way out here. Okay, so one of the first things you see when you come on the island are these dead trees filled with nests of cormorants. And with all their poop, all their guano, it actually kills the trees. But it's just such a kind of a comical sight. These big, black, kind of ungainly birds on land raise their babies all together. But right on the beach there, here's a herring gull sitting on her eggs. And these are the babies of a black-backed gull. Of course, they're so well camouflaged because they just lay their eggs right on the beach. Here's a black-backed gull with her babies. And here's a few more. And here's, I'll just play a second of this. I don't want to run out of time. You see its little beak, how it punches a hole in the shell. This one's already made its way out. Same thing here. I'll get this. Let me do it. Okay. So here's the Great Egret again, and here's the Great Egret. And the A train goes right by here. This is Great Egret egg and a hatchling. Here are triplets, glossy ibises. Let me go back. Oh God, they're so beautiful. I've seen them in Central Park too, walking along the stream called the Lock in the northern park. Here are their glossy ibis eggs. There's the A train. Those are all cormorants sitting together.
Hi, I'm Don Reapy, and it's the annual Shorebird Festival. And right now we're heading off to the south end of the East Pond.
Mom, I'm seeing a bird. Oh, look!
So the reason we're having a Shorebird Festival is that of all the groups of birds, shorebirds are pretty much the most difficult to identify. That's why the birders like them. Also, they fly amazing distances. One bird in particular, the red knot, will leave here, fly nonstop to Brazil, and then south to Tierra del Fuego to spend the winter. Thousands of miles, several days, nonstop flights. And when they come back in the spring, they're more colorful. And that's the time when the horseshoe crabs come up too. So they feed voraciously on the horseshoe crab eggs because they've lost so much of their body fat, i.e. fuel. So they have to build that up again because they're going up to their Arctic breeding grounds, right? So the importance of these refuges along the coast are stopover places. They don't breed here, they don't winter here, but they stop here and fuel. It's like a big gas station.
Okay. But so here's another habitat that's rich in food for these shorebirds. Northern Manhattan is probably the most unchanged place in Brooklyn and Queens and maybe the Bronx. But this is Inwood Hill Park. This is when the Lenape lived here. And now, and this photos are from Manhattan. This is what it looks like today. So this is the Henry Hudson Parkway, the Henry Hudson Bridge. Here you can see it's almost the same, right? Inwood Hill Park, Fort Tryon Park, where I live, and High Bridge Park. Look how much parkland there is up here. I think a third of the area up here is parkland. And in this kind of an environment, you get these raptors that eat fish, like the osprey and the bald eagle, which we have here. We have freshwater ponds throughout New York City. This is the Collect Pond. This is what it looked like in 1798, and then of course paved over. A freshwater ecosystem is so rich with food for everybody that comes there and plant life. Ducks, geese, and swans make up the waterfowl. And there are two types of ducks, diving ducks and dabbling ducks. Dabbling ducks have their legs in the middle of their body. So we have northern shovelers and green-winged teals and black duck. This is the Mandarin duck. The Mandarin duck male showed up at the boat basin like in 2010. And it was very famous for showing up in Central Park a few years ago. And this is how they dabble. They stick their little butts in the air and kick their feet, and their bills are down at the bottom getting food. American black duck, I'm not going to show this. Wood ducks can both dabble and dive. This is the northern shoveler. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're beautiful. This is the male. And this is how they feed. They create a circle and they move around and they kick their feet and they use their bills and they dredge up all kinds of aquatic invertebrates and detritus that they feed on. So the females are much more brown. They're not nearly as colorful as the males. These are diving ducks, the merganser, the tiny little adorable ruddy duck whose bill turns blue during breeding season, the bufflehead, hooded mergansers. All these ducks can also live and fish in brackish water. So in all of the waterways surrounding the city. I took this at the Bronx Zoo. This is a bufflehead swimming. You can see how far back their feet are and propel them through the water. Dabbling waterfowl, ducks, geese, and swans, make their nests on top of the water, near the water, whereas diving ducks are cavity nesters. So little faces. Waterfowl babies are called precocial. Like you would say, someone is precocious. They can do things at an early age. Well, precocial birds are born covered in down feathers. Their eyes are open. They can walk. They can feed. They can swim. They can do all of this without the help of their parents. At night, they have to be kept warm under their parents' wings. There's a swan and her cygnet. Waterfowl had these bills with lamellae, which they used to strain the water for aquatic invertebrates and algae. And they have this horny tip to dig for food. They have webbed feet for swimming. And they have highly waterproof feathers. So they're, actually, there's another.
This duck has fabulous feathers, and he knows it. But they're not just for looks. They make an incredible raincoat. Ducks and geese paddle their days away in often chilly waters. Waters that can suck the heat right out of you. They rely on their extraordinary feathers to stay all dry and toasty. But such glamorous plumage requires a strict preening regimen. Birds have two main types of feathers, veined and down. Down feathers are fuzzy and soft. Their fluffiness creates a space for warm air right next to the bird's skin. These goslings are born with an extra dense coat of down feathers. As the goslings grow, they develop more elaborate, veined feathers. These give birds their shapely curves and color and help them fly. Plus, the veined feathers protect the down by forming a barrier that keeps air in and water out. This central rachis provides the main structure. Barbs extend outwards. From those, barbules reach out. Some of those barbules end in little hooks called, wait for it, barbicels. They connect the overlapping barbs to one another like Velcro, weaving a lattice so tight it repels water. But as these birds strut their stuff, some of the barbicels lose their grip. seal breaks. The barbs separate. That's where all that painstaking preening comes in. Every time the duck runs its bill down the length of a feather, it zips its barbs back together again.
Let me go back. Let me stop this. So if you find, say, turkey feathers, I find a lot of turkey feathers. It's an interesting experiment to do, is to drop water on them and watch it roll right off. And you can pull the barbs apart and then you can make them come back together. And children like to do this. And then they can learn about feathers too. So there are many goose species and swans mate for life. And they will only find another mate if their mate dies. These are brant geese. They also travel very far. They winter here, but they're summer up in the Arctic Circle. And the same with snow geese. They winter here, and then they all take off for the Arctic tundra. And as I said before, we have 30,000 acres of parkland with millions of trees and 8,000 miles of streets with 800,000 street trees, all home to perching birds. They have 3 toes forward and 1 that can lock onto the back. These babies are all trishul, meaning they're born naked. They have no feathers, their eyes are shut, they have to be fed, so they can't see, they can barely hold their heads up like human babies, where we are all trishul also. The warblers arrive in spring. So we have the red starts and the yellow rump warblers and the yellow, common yellow throat, magnolia warbler. These are all wonderful warblers who come up because they eat insects and they have to be in the South and Central America and South America to find food. And the same thing for hummingbirds, right? There are no flowers for them to get to take the nectar. These are all migrating birds, orioles. Oh, someone's drawing on. Thank you. Scarlet tanager. I just go through these quickly because I want to finish up. So the berry eaters are birds that can stay here year round, like the cedar waxwing, the American robin. The worms eat in the summer. Robins will catch worms for their babies and they'll eat them too. But they stay here in the winter because we have so many berries. Mockingbirds, the cardinals, European starlings, the monk parakeets that make a huge nest. Now, they are not native to this area. We're not sure how they got here, but I think they escaped from the pet trade. This is a Greenwood cemetery. They build these nests that are 2-3 stories, and they live in these communities. These birds mate for life also. And here he's eating a service berries. We have year-round woodpecker like the red belly. They have 2 toes forward, 2 toes back, so they can cling on to the trunk. We have pileated woodpeckers here, downy and hairy. These are all year-round woodpeckers. And then we have migrating woodpeckers like the northern flickers. And they are ground-feeding woodpeckers. They hammer their beak into the ground to get beetles and worms and other invertebrates. And then we have the yellow belly that migrates up here. It's a sapsucker, and it drills these holes in trees to get the sap as it's running up the tree after a long winter. And follow closely behind are the ruby-throated hummingbirds. They follow the yellow-bellied sapsucker, so they will have something to eat before the flowers open. There's a red-bellied and the cardinal flower. And of course, they insert their beak into tube-like flowers to get the nectar. That is their food. Then we have our fast-running game bird like the wild turkey. And then, of course, our birds of prey, red-tailed hawk, peregrine falcon. This is a peregrine falcon baby on the Marine Park Bridge in Jamaica Bay. We have more peregrine falcons in New York City than any other urban area in the world. This is an American kestrel. This is my friend's cat, Mr. Darcy, watching it eat. Here's the male. Cooper's hawk, great horned owl, saw-whet owl, tiny, tiny owl, screech owl, and the barred owl. So of course, the predators use their strong beaks to catch their prey and rip their prey apart. And they use their talons often to kill their prey too and carry them back. I don't want to talk about pigeons right now, but I happen to love them. They're very important birds, very intelligent. We brought them here for food, and they can be beautiful. So I'm going to finish up with what's being done to protect birds. And the New York City Audubon Society has Project Safe Flight, where they have these skyscrapers turn their lights down at night so birds don't think it's the moon and fly toward these skyscrapers and end up dead on the sidewalk. And then they have, they're making sure that any new buildings have bird-friendly glass. So, you know, we've gone from a time where New Yorkers killed birds to where now New Yorkers are protecting birds. We don't have time for that. And Bobby and Kathy Horvath had this organization called Wildlife in Need of Rescue and Rehabilitation, where they save thousands of birds and all kinds of animals every year. And even though I'm not going to show the video, the Wild Bird Fund is the only wildlife rehabilitation place in Manhattan where you can take almost any kind of animal. They rescue thousands of birds every year. And if they can be saved, they're released back into the wild from where they came. You're going to get this video and you can watch this on your own. And then just to finish up, in Washington Heights, in the area where Audubon lived, they now have the Audubon Mural Project. And artists are coming in from all over and doing paintings on these buildings of all the birds that live in New York City. And I think it's just quite wonderful. And my last slide is of Central Park's owl. And I took this Mother's Day, where I did a bird walk with my granddaughter, who's 6, and my daughter-in-law. And we saw this group of people looking up, and there was this famous Barry the barred owl sitting in Central Park. So that's it. I'm going to stop right there.